Hello, I'm Glenn W. Hunter, Chair of Touchstone Youth Resource Services, based out of Nashville, Tennessee, nonprofit organization focusing on social emotional learning. And this is Shor Denny, our subject matter expert, Executive Director of Community Now in the Inland Empire. Whoop, whoop. So today in 3 Cs of SEL, we're going to talk about labeling. They don't know me.
They don't know me. They don't know me.
Which is something that's a very common theme that we find, particularly in the development of our youth. You know, when you think about it, Shor, people like to use labels because that makes it easy for them to categorize others. But what is the damage that this does to our young people?
Well, it can be very damaging. Labels are damaging. When you talk about us labeling people, you have to figure all of us are labeled. Everything is labeled. So it's kind of an unconscious bias. It's going to end up being, what does that label mean to you? Is that label negative? Is that label positive? Most of the time, however, the labels are negative. They're meant in a negative way. So we're going to say something like, oh, you're stupid, or we're going to categorize someone that we see doing things that basically we've been taught that this is the label for. Right? It's not like you come up with those labels. We've been taught that this is a label for something. And then when we find someone or something that we can put into that package, we label it that way. Right, wrong, or indifferent. It kind of actually takes the human part out of it, right? Once you label something, they're no longer human. They're what you've labeled them. So it can be detrimental to our youth to be labeled in a negative way. Our youth can get labeled as being the quiet kid. They can get labeled as being poor. They can get labeled as being stupid, but it doesn't mean that that is what that child or person really is. It just means that someone has decided that they're going to use that label on them.
You know, I think it's fascinating when you talk about how these labels just come from different perspectives, different angles, but there's such a strong commonality in them. You know, again, my organization is based out of Nashville, Tennessee, so we have sort of a southern perspective on social emotional learning issues. You're in Southern California when you look over Community Now, which is culturally very, very different, but that same idea of I have to put you in a category to, in many cases, belittle you seems to be consistent. What kind of kid does that though? I mean, who's the one out there inflicting that kind of pain?
You mean in a negative way? Because again, we're all labeling. We're all labeling. We've labeled the president, right? The presidency. It doesn't matter who's in the presidency, but the label of president, we used to think meant honor. It meant, that they would be just. It meant, so these were words or labels that we put on the office of president. So these labels are coming from just different ideas of people. When you come from a rich household, the parents are raising their kids in a place, and they may not want what they deem to be bad things to come and influence their youth. So they're going to label those bad things, and then they're going to teach their child those labels so that those children know how to identify that and how to stay away from it. So it's something that our youth are using to identify and to separate each other, right? The question comes to when they believe that what they are labeled is more than what they're labeling others, right? And think I'm better than your label.
No, that makes sense. I mean, once you create that distinction, it really becomes a challenge for them to actually communicate as people, because now they just put them in boxes.
Exactly. So you're going to talk to the stupid kid like he's stupid, right? You're going to talk to the poor kid like he's poor, right? Say you can go do an event, there's an event coming up, and you have friends that are going, but it costs money. You may not even talk to the kid that's poor because you figure, oh, they can't go. You've already labeled them. You've already assumed what is going to happen with them rather than, asking them if they want to go. So that's kind of a way of labeling.
Let's see. So for our next question, because you are our subject matter expert, how would you describe the relationship between labeling and bullying?
There is a correlation, but they are definitely not the same, right? A label, as we just went through, is something that comes from outside, right? It's going to be an influence, and you're going to learn what the value of a label is. Bullying is when you devalue someone and you simply want to antagonize them, and you want to cause them pain and stress. So there's a difference. You can have the label of being poor, but just because you've classified them as poor doesn't mean you're going to bully them. Right.
Okay.
So you just because you label someone doesn't mean you're bullying them. Bullying, the definition is ongoing physical, verbal, or mental harm to another person. So if it's not ongoing and it's not impacting the other person on a continuous basis, it's not bullying.
Okay. So I think if I take that to a next logical step, labeling starts to resemble bullying in the sense that once someone actually assigns those characteristics and then continues to reinforce those characteristics in their interaction.
Yes, yes. That would be throwing pencils at the geek, right? Right? You know he's a geek, you've decided he's a geek, you've labeled him a geek because he doesn't fit in with the kind of friends that you're playing with, right? And usually the geek is smart. But not all geeks are smart, right? They're just different. So, but because you've labeled that person a geek, and you might be one of the popular people, or want to hang with the popular people, so you would try to demean someone else to make you bigger. And that would be a way of bullying them so that you felt better about your status.
I see, which definitely gets complicated because sometimes that's merely a mask because maybe the kid who's bullying has some inner geek issues, I would imagine.
Well, they could have inner geek issues, but they could also be bullied at home, right? They could be bullied by their siblings. They could be lashing out for injustices that they feel that they have of their own, and that's why they don't have the self-esteem, and they're looking for their self-esteem by belittling others.
Wow, makes a lot of sense. So that actually gives us a really logical link to our next question, and that is, why do some kids like picking on the smart kids?
Well, as I started, it's kind of a sense of inferiority, right? It's in our society, the smart people we assume are going to succeed in life. So if you are not smart, then subliminally kind of you have this sense of I'm not going to do as well, and now I'm going to torture or dislike the person that I assume is going to do well in life, right? The smart kid could get more attention, and the other child is not. So they're going to bully the smart kid to get the attention that they think the smart child is getting.
Wow. So a lot of it comes down to perception, which actually loops us back to labeling.
Right.
Because a lot of labeling is based off of perception, whether that kid literally demonstrates or owns those characteristics or not.
Or not.
So with your SEL superpowers, what tools do you suggest to help people who are being labeled to overcome that stigma and really become functional and contributing people in their social groups?
The first thing I'm going to say to you is don't accept it. Don't buy in. If you're not a nerd, don't be a nerd. Don't think of yourself as a nerd. If you are not what they are labeling you, don't be it. It's that simple. So the way to overcome and to cope is to know who you are, understand yourself, and try to learn and be okay with what it is you are and who you are. There will be others that will appreciate the person that you are. It's just simply that the people you're around right now don't. So you're going to have to, compensate for outside influence or socialization by finding things that you enjoy, that further your interests, and hopefully help you start socializing a little more. You could also work on social skills.
There you go. Cope. Be who you are. Work on social skills. Shor, you got a lot of information in a short window of time. And as always, We greatly appreciate your insight and your ability to make some of these complicated social emotional learning issues very tangible and actionable so that our young people can literally grow and really bring their individual gifts to a society that desperately needs them.
Thank you. I'm excited, and I just hope that you guys are listening and that you use the tools that we're putting out there. Remember to subscribe, like us, and follow us and share us with others.
Once again, I'm Glenn W. Hunter. This is subject matter expert Shor Denny of Community Now. Thank you for staying with us.